Wisdom, once a respected bank manager, now pushed a humble wheelbarrow through the dusty streets. This was a far cry from the life of wealth and importance he had once known, all destroyed by baseless accusations of theft from his company. One fateful Monday, he arrived at work only to find a termination letter waiting for him on his desk. His accounts were frozen, his house and car seized by the bank. The sudden fall from grace left Wisdom hurt, depressed, and heartbroken. Forced to survive, he had no choice but to take up the humiliating job of wheelbarrow pushing, a far cry from his previous position of authority. At home, the weight of his misfortune was doubled by Belinda, his wife, who never stopped complaining. She cursed him daily for his inability to provide the lavish lifestyle she craved. But Belinda's betrayal cut deeper than her words. When Wisdom sought help from his younger brother, Victor, hoping for a bit of relief, he walked into a scene that shattered his soul. There, in Victor's bedroom, lay Belinda in an intimate embrace with Victor himself. The pain of the sight was unbearable. Instead of showing remorse, Victor ordered Wisdom out of his house. "Get out, lazy man," Victor sneered shamelessly, continuing his illicit affair with Belinda. Wisdom staggered away, heartbroken and betrayed. Days passed, then weeks, and Belinda never returned. She had abandoned their 2 sons to chase a life of luxury with Victor. Wisdom worked tirelessly, pushing his barrow to make ends meet, but his earnings were meager, and the strain began to show. When his 2 sons were sent home from school for unpaid fees and his landlord issued an eviction notice, Wisdom knew he was at his breaking point. Desperate, he swallowed his pride and returned to Victor's house, hoping for a shred of mercy. But Victor's response was cruel. "Do I look like your bank thief?" Victor spat. Belinda emerged from the room, rolling her eyes at the sight of Wisdom. "Why are you still here?" she hissed. Without hesitation, Victor transferred another large sum of money into Belinda's account. Wisdom watched in despair, tears streaming down his face as he begged for help. Victor shoved him away without a second thought, and Wisdom returned to his humble dwelling, his heart weighed down by sorrow and betrayal. Little did Wisdom know that his downfall was no accident. Victor's sudden wealth had raised eyebrows, but few knew the truth. As a final-year university student, Victor had joined a cult that promised wealth, power, and authority. The price, a sacrifice. Someone close to him had to lose everything. For Victor, the choice was easy. Sacrificing Wisdom's destiny for his own gain was a price he was willing to pay. The days rolled by, each one harder than the last for Wisdom. His 2 sons, Emmanuel and David, often went to bed hungry. Their once bubbly laughter had faded into silence, replaced by the sound of their growling stomachs. Wisdom's heart ached as he watched them struggle, powerless to give them the life they deserved. One evening, as he pushed his wheelbarrow through the market, he overheard 2 traders gossiping about Victor's newfound wealth. "Did you hear how Victor built a mansion in just 6 months?" one said. "And he's driving the latest cars too," the other replied. "I heard he made his fortune through dark means." The words sent a chill down Wisdom's spine. He had always wondered how Victor, a struggling student, had suddenly become so rich. Could there be truth to the rumors? Later that night, as Wisdom lay on the thin mat in his small room, he replayed the events of the past months in his mind. The betrayal, the wealth, the arrogance. It all pointed to something sinister. The next morning, he decided to confront Victor one last time, not for money, but for answers. When he arrived at Victor's mansion, he was met by 2 heavily armed security guards. "Who are you here to see?" one of them asked. "Wisdom," he replied. "I'm his brother." The guards exchanged glances before one of them barked, "Wait here." A few minutes later, Victor appeared, dressed in a designer suit and gold jewelry, his face twisted into a mocking smile as he approached Wisdom. "What do you want now?" Victor asked angrily. "I need the truth," Wisdom said, his voice trembling. "What did you do to become so wealthy? Why did my life fall apart the moment yours improved?" Victor's smile faded, replaced by a cold, calculating look. "You wouldn't understand, Wisdom," he said. "Life is about survival. Some of us are willing to do whatever it takes to rise above the rest." "What are you talking about?" Wisdom demanded. Victor leaned in close, his voice a low whisper. Your life, your destiny, it was the price I paid for my success. You should be honored. Really, thanks to you, I have everything I've ever wanted. Wisdom staggered back, his mind reeling from Victor's confession. You sacrificed me? He whispered. Your own brother. Victor smiled. You always had everything handed to you. Good job, beautiful family, respect. It was my turn to shine. Fury boiled within Wisdom. You destroyed my life. My children are suffering because of you. Victor laughed. That's not my problem. Now, if you're done wasting my time, get out of here. As Wisdom turned to leave, Belinda appeared, dressed in expensive clothes and dripping with jewelry. She looked at Wisdom with disdain, as if he were a stranger still begging. I see, she said, her voice dripping with sarcasm. Wisdom said nothing. He walked away, his heart heavy with anger and despair. But as he made his way back to his small room, a new resolve began to form in his mind. He couldn't let Victor's betrayal be the end of his story. He had to fight back, not just for himself, but for his sons. Victor sat in his grand, lavish mansion, staring out the window as thoughts of Wisdom's confrontation earlier in the day replayed in his mind. For the first time in months, a flicker of doubt crossed his heart. What if he digs deeper? What if he exposes everything? Victor muttered to himself. Unlike Belinda, who only cared about living in luxury, Victor bore the full weight of his dark secret alone. His sudden rise to wealth wasn't a stroke of luck, as most people believed. It was a calculated, evil act. As the night deepened, Victor knew he couldn't take chances. He drove out to the edge of town, where the path turned to thick forest. The Grand Master's shrine stood hidden within the trees, shrouded in an eerie silence that sent chills down Victor's spine. When he arrived, the Grand Master, a tall figure cloaked in black robes, emerged from the shadows. You look troubled, Victor, the Grand Master said, his deep voice echoing through the night. It's my brother, Wisdom, Victor replied, bowing slightly. He confronted me today. He's asking too many questions. I fear he'll find out the truth. The Grand Master's eyes glinted with malice. Wisdom is tied to you by blood. His persistence could undo everything we've worked for. To silence him completely, a greater sacrifice must be made. Victor frowned, his chest tightening. What kind of sacrifice? The lives of his children, the Grand Master said coldly. Their innocent souls will solidify your wealth and ensure your power remains. Unshaken, Victor hesitated, the weight of the suggestion sinking in, but his greed and fear overpowered any lingering shred of guilt. Do it, he said, his voice firm despite the turmoil inside him. The Grand Master began his ritual, chanting strange words as he mixed herbs, ash, and blood in a clay pot. Finally, he handed the pot to Victor. Take this, he instructed. Find their footprints and pour this into them. By dawn, they will sleep and never wake. Victor took the pot with trembling hands. As he left the shrine, his mind battled with itself. A part of him questioned if he had gone too far, but his greed silenced that voice. That night, Wisdom sat in the dimly lit room he shared with his two sons, Emmanuel and David. He watched them sleep, their small chests rising and falling peacefully. Daddy, will we ever be happy again? Emmanuel had asked earlier, his voice filled with innocent hope. Wisdom had forced a smile and replied, Yes, my son. One day things will get better. But deep down, Wisdom felt helpless. The weight of their struggles was crushing him. He knelt by their bedside and prayed, tears streaming down his face. God, please don't let my children suffer. They are all I have left. Show us mercy. Unknown to him, Victor stood outside, clutching the clay pot. He poured its contents into the boy's footprints in the yard, muttering the Grand Master's incantation under his breath. The air grew cold around him as he completed the ritual and hurried away. The next morning, the house was eerily silent. Wisdom stirred awake and called out, Emmanuel, David, time to get up. When there was no response, he went to their bed and shook them gently. Wake up, my boys, it's morning. But the boys didn't stir. A deep sense of dread gripped Wisdom as he touched their cold faces. No, no, he cried, shaking them harder, realizing something was terribly wrong. He screamed for help, rushing to his neighbors. Please, somebody help me. My children won't wake up. Neighbors gathered quickly, but it was too late. A local doctor arrived and delivered the devastating news. Both boys were gone. Wisdom fell to his knees, his wails piercing the morning air. He cradled their lifeless bodies, tears streaming down his face. Why? Why them, God? They were innocent. They didn't deserve this. He sat beside them for hours, clutching their tiny hands, his heart shattered into a million pieces. Memories of their laughter and dreams flooded his mind, each one a fresh stab of pain. As the sun set, he buried them with trembling hands, tears soaking the earth. You were my world, he whispered, placing the last handful of dirt over their graves. Forgive me for failing you. That night, as he sat alone in the dark, anger replaced his sorrow. He thought about Victor, the arrogance in his voice, the sudden wealth, the secrets. Deep down, Wisdom knew his brother was behind this. You've taken everything from me, Victor, he whispered, his voice shaking with rage. My life, my dignity, and now my children. But I swear you will not go unpunished. Wisdom's mind burned with fury and pain as he walked toward Victor's mansion. His children were gone, and his heart was shattered. Grief had consumed him, but beneath it was a rising tide of anger. He needed answers, and he needed them now. When he reached Victor's home, the grand gates stood tall and imposing, a cruel reminder of the wealth and power Victor had gained at his expense. Wisdom banged on the gate with trembling fists. Victor, open this gate. You have taken everything from me. A security guard peeked out but made no move to open it. What do you want here? The guard asked sternly. I need to see Victor. Wisdom shouted, his voice cracking. Tell him Wisdom is here. The guard hesitated, but eventually let him in. Victor's absence made the mansion feel hollow, yet Wisdom's footsteps were heavy with purpose as he marched up to the grand door and knocked furiously. Moments later, Belinda appeared, her face expressionless, dressed in a silk robe that glimmered in the evening light. What are you doing here? She asked, her tone cold. Wisdom's eyes filled with tears. My boys are gone, Belinda, he said, his voice breaking. Our boys, they died in their sleep. I know Victor has something to do with it. He took everything from me. Belinda rolled her eyes and crossed her arms. Stop calling them our boys, she said dismissively. They're your responsibility, not mine. I left you long ago. Don't come here blaming Victor or me for your failures. Her words struck Wisdom like a slap to the face. He couldn't believe how heartless she had become. What kind of mother are you? He demanded. You abandoned your children to chase luxury and wealth. You are nothing but a heartless, selfish woman. Belinda's face twisted with anger. Get out of my house, Wisdom, she said sharply. You have no right to come here and insult me. I will leave when I have had my say, Wisdom retorted. You and Victor will pay for everything you have done. My sons didn't deserve to die like this. Belinda's eyes darkened with rage. Boys, she shouted, clapping her hands. Two young men, who worked as Victor's bodyguards, emerged from a nearby room. Take this fool outside and teach him a lesson. The men moved quickly, grabbing Wisdom by the arms. Leave me alone, Wisdom yelled, struggling against their grip, but he was no match for their strength. They dragged him outside, tossing him to the ground like trash. One of the men landed a hard kick to Wisdom's ribs, and the other punched him in the face. Pain exploded through Wisdom's body as they continued beating him, their fists and feet raining down mercilessly. Stop, he pleaded, coughing up blood. Please, stop. Belinda stood by the doorway, watching with a cruel smile. Next time, think twice before coming here to insult me, she said coldly. When the men finally stopped, they left Wisdom lying on the ground, battered and broken. His vision blurred as tears fell down his cheeks. Slowly, he dragged himself to his feet, leaning against a nearby fence for support. It was Victor's neighbor, Mrs. Agnes, who found him, was an older woman with a kind heart and sharp eyes. "Wisdom, what happened to you?" she exclaimed, rushing to his side. Wisdom tried to speak, but his voice was weak. Mrs. Agnes didn't wait for an answer. She helped him to her home, her hands gentle but firm. "Sit here," she said, guiding him to a chair. "Let me get some hot water and cloths to clean you up." She returned moments later and began pressing the hot cloth against his swollen face. Wisdom winced at the heat, but the pain was nothing compared to the anguish in his heart. "You shouldn't keep going to those people," Mrs. Agnes said gently. "They're dangerous. Victor and Belinda are no good for you." "I have to," Wisdom whispered, his voice raw. "They have taken everything from me, my home, my dignity, my children. I can't just let them get away with it." Mrs. Agnes sighed deeply. "You are fighting a dangerous battle, Wisdom. They have already shown they have no mercy. But if you insist on going down this path, you must be prepared for the consequences." Wisdom's eyes filled with tears again. "What more can they take from me? I have already lost everything." Mrs. Agnes placed a comforting hand on his shoulder. "Maybe it's time to fight differently," she said. "Not with your fists, but with wisdom and patience. Seek help from God." When Victor returned home that night, Mrs. Agnes confronted him. "Your brother came here, beaten to the ground by your bodyguards," she snapped. "You and that girlfriend of yours have no shame." Victor laughed coldly. "Stay out of this, Agnes. You have no idea what's going on." "I don't need to know the details," Mrs. Agnes retorted. "What I do know is that Wisdom is your brother, and one day you'll regret the way you've treated him." Victor waved her off and went inside, but her words lingered in his mind. He knew Wisdom wouldn't give up easily, and the thought unsettled him. Wisdom kept pushing his wheelbarrow every day from morning till evening. He walked through the busy market, calling out to people, "Let me help you carry your goods. Wheelbarrow for hire." Some people gave him work, but many treated him badly. They talked to him like he was nothing. Some refused to pay him, others would give him small food instead of money. One woman asked him to carry her bags of rice to her car. Wisdom worked hard and finished quickly, but when he asked for his money, the woman frowned at him. "Take this bread and go," she said, throwing the bread at him. "Please, madam," Wisdom begged. "I need money. My children are gone. I am suffering." "Are you stupid?" the woman shouted. "If you don't want the bread, leave it." "Should I call the police for you?" Wisdom's heart broke. He picked up the bread and walked away quietly. "Thank you," he whispered, even though tears filled his eyes. Another day, a man asked Wisdom to carry yams to his shop. When they reached the shop, the man gave Wisdom a plate of rice. "Sir, I need money," Wisdom said softly. "Please, even a little. I need to pay my rent." The man looked at him. "If you don't leave my shop now, I will call the police." Wisdom held the plate of rice and walked away. "Thank you, sir," he said, but inside, he felt bitter. Every night, Wisdom went home tired and hungry. His house was small and empty. The silence hurt him more than anything else. He sat on the floor, looking at the corner where his sons used to play. He held their old clothes close to his chest, crying softly. "Emmanuel, David," he whispered, tears falling down his cheeks. "I'm sorry. I failed you. I couldn't protect you. Please forgive me." Some nights, he had no food to eat. His stomach made loud noises, but the pain in his heart was worse. "God, why me?" he cried one night. "What did I do to deserve this? Why have you left me to suffer like this?" One day, it rained heavily. Wisdom sat by the roadside, soaked and cold. His wheelbarrow stood beside him, looking old and rusty. People passed by, but nobody stopped to help him. A group of young boys saw him and started laughing. "Look at the wheelbarrow man," one of them said. "He is dirty and poor, like a beggar." They threw stones at him and ran away, laughing. Wisdom sat there, shaking from the cold. He didn't have the strength to fight back. When the rain stopped, he pushed his wheelbarrow home. His clothes were wet and his body was weak. That night, he sat on his bench, staring at the empty room. "I can't live like this anymore," he said to himself. His voice was low, but his heart was full of anger. "Victor has taken everything from me. My sons are gone, my life is ruined. I know my God will fight for me. Wisdom stepped outside his house, ready to start another difficult day. His wheelbarrow was parked by the door, its rusty handles showing signs of his endless struggles. He had barely taken a few steps when he saw someone walking toward him. It was Belinda. She stood tall and bold, her face showing no shame for the pain she had caused him. Wisdom, she said coldly. I came to warn you. Stay away from me and my man. Stop interfering in my relationship. Wisdom looked at her, anger and disgust burning in his eyes. Belinda, he said, his voice shaking. You should be ashamed of yourself. How can you stand here and talk about a relationship with my own brother, my blood? You destroyed my home and left my children to suffer, and you have the guts to come here and warn me. Belinda laughed, a mocking sound that cut through the air like a blade. Ashamed, she repeated. I don't feel any shame, Wisdom. Let me tell you something. I only go where there is money. Your brother has money, and that's why I'm with him. If he goes broke tomorrow, I will leave him too and find another rich man. I do not like poverty. Wisdom's hands clenched into fists, his body shook with anger. Belinda, is this the woman I once called my wife, the mother of my children? You left your sons to chase wealth. You abandoned them like they were nothing. What kind of heartless woman are you? Belinda rolled her eyes. Don't lecture me, Wisdom, she said. You are a failure, a man who pushes a wheelbarrow for food. You can't even take care of